I'm listening to Glenn Greenwald, and he says, my friend Tucker, he's such a unique person because he always admits when he makes mistakes.
You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so Hasan Piker sat down with Norm Finkelstein. This has been a long time in the making. They're in similar areas in terms of talking about Palestine and the genocide in Gaza, criticizing Israel in very harsh terms, being very frank about the issue of Israel. So they mostly agree on things. They had a couple points of disagreement here over issues like the right-wing approach to Israel and anti-Semitism, and like where the distinction of anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism is. Not that they have a huge disagreement on that, but they definitely have a disagreement in the way that they talk about it. A lot of people were mad at Norm Finkelstein because he sat down with Candace Owens and did a long podcast with her, has done multiple actually. And obviously Candace Owens is a known anti-Semite and takes the critiques of Israel much further into a place of criticizing Jews as a whole. And Norm Finkelstein kind of lets Candace Owens off the hook in a way that he did not with Tucker Carlson. He feels pretty strongly about the insidious nature of Tucker Carlson's project and not so much about Candace Owens. So that's what I wanted to point out here, as well as getting into a little bit of a contradiction that I found when it came to his logic following Candace Owens and anti-Semitism and whether or not what they put out there is anti-Semitic. So here's the first part where he's talking about Tucker Carlson, and Hasan Piker and him pretty much agree that Tucker Carlson is a noxious force who is using the issue of Israel and Gaza for political gain. So here's that.
Actually, a really interesting point because I've heard your criticisms of some on the right and the way that they are approaching the issue of Palestine, and some of them have even become thought leaders almost.
They are the thought leaders. Just by virtue of the size of the audience they reach, they have become the voice of the Gaza. And that's a very strange phenomenon.
Yeah.
The idea that, for example, Megyn Kelly cares about poor brown Muslim children in Gaza, I just find that very peculiar.
Yeah.
And my problem is, you said I have a problem with the right wing. That's not my problem.
I do. I personally abhor reactionary thought.
That people on the left don't see this as somehow strange and problematic.
I also agree with you on that.
I said, if Tucker Carlson wins, if he runs for office, this was before there was any talk about it. I said, but speculating, if he were to run for office, and if he were to run on the real America first, and if he ran with a Thomas Massey or her name the woman
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Or Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah.
And he ran on the platform of, like the Nazis did, that they had a solution to the economic crisis.
Yeah.
If the economy crashed, I think there could be a problem. I'm listening to Glenn Greenwald, and he says, my friend Tucker, he's such a unique person because he always admits when he makes mistakes. And why can't we have other people like my friend Tucker, who I happen to have a close relationship with? And he says, what's his example? He says, well, Tucker has now admitted he was wrong about Muslims. And he's now saying that Muslims aren't bad people, and he's wrong. I think to myself, yeah, that's one possibility. The other possibility is, since he's been busy attacking Israel and Jews, he sees a new demographic.
Yeah.
So maybe he's changed his tune, not because Tucker is so wonderful, because he admits to his errors, but he just made a pragmatic choice that, say he runs for president, it wouldn't hurt to have that demographic on his side.
I don't think it wouldn't hurt to also have the credibility, the established credibility as someone who is, on the right side on this moral stain.
All right, so I mean, I think this is a pretty standard take from Norm Finkelstein, or at least the critical perspective on Tucker Carlson. This is the right stance, and he even takes it a little further, saying that he was already attacking Israel and Jews and found that to be a convenient position, and then the demographic of Muslim listeners that came along with that was just something that he was happy to sort of capitalize on. So I think that's the most accurate assessment of what Tucker Carlson is doing. I think that he has his own reasons for criticizing or positioning himself against Israel and also defending certain Muslim nations in the region, which he's been doing a lot in a way that leftists aren't really interested in doing. Defending the merit of nations like the UAE or other monarchies is something that Tucker Carlson's more interested in than any leftist, which shows a different set of sort of intentions there. Now, the reason this is interesting is because when it comes to Candace Owens, he doesn't really take the same stance. And the distinction he makes is that Tucker Carlson seems like a true political threat. And he views Tucker Carlson as somebody that has political ambitions, wants to be president. And so if he were to put together a coalition with this sort of like new right strain of people that are going against Israel and Epstein, etc., then that could be a serious political problem. So that is a lot of clarity from him, and much better than some people that you see on the left who genuinely would argue that a Tucker Carlson candidacy or presidency could be a good thing. Now, you can say those aren't really people on the left, or how many people actually believe that, and I mostly agree, but I do think that there's a strain of thought out there that goes something like that among people who are less politically engaged, maybe people who don't pay very close attention to what Tucker Carlson says, and that's why I think it's important to stay aware of that his overall desire for a more Christian nationalist America has not changed at all. He's just found a way to fold a criticism of Israel, a harsh criticism of Israel, into that. And that may have had some positive effects amongst the discourse on the right, but it's still not something to be trusted. So I'm glad to see clarity from him on that. And here's the part where Hasan brings up the fact that he has talked to Candace Owens before, and, a little bit of back and forth here, not much of a debate or argument. Hasan makes it clear that he's not, bringing this up to beat him over the head with it. I also don't fault him necessarily for talking to Candace Owens. I haven't listened to those, so it's possible that he was too soft or didn't push back. He makes the case that she had me on when other people wouldn't have me on and let me push back in the areas I wanted to push back in. And so overall, I got the message out. So here's him saying that.
So you sat down with Candace Owens, you discussed your books. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, I don't know if you saw this, but she was, waving around the copy of The Talmudic Jew. And she is very anti-Semitic. And what's actually kind of ironic about this, maybe you'll appreciate the irony here, is that Candace Owens, as well as Nick Fuentes, actually got a lot of their early notes, and Candace Owens' career is entirely concocted by David Horowitz and then later Ben Shapiro, two very conservative Jewish Americans. But I wanted to hear what your perspective is on Candace Owens in particular, as someone who is, like, I think you and I both agree, very anti-Semitic, who's also mentioned in the dual anti-Semitism condemnation bill that I was on, where they put me and Candace Owens side by side to try to apply pressure to the platforms that have me on, that claim that I'm anti-Semitic as well as her.
Well, first of all, you don't bite the hand. As a general rule, I have to be serious about this, and I suspect you'll be serious too. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Candace Owens had me on her program twice. And just as a factual matter, I was, with one exception, for 10 minutes. I was never on even Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera blacklisted me. So I have to be careful just out of pure, propriety.
Yeah.
She had me on. She had me on twice. And she let me speak. There were moments where I significantly disagreed with her, and I was able to say what I wanted. Now, on the question of anti-Semitism, I'll be, fancy word, nuanced. And you can disagree with me or agree with me. I don't consider Candace Owens a political menace. She carries around prejudices about Jews. As I say, everybody carries around prejudices about everybody. You know the expression, you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
There were many things that she said which I strongly disagreed with. And then you have to decide, unless I'm going to stop her at every point. When Crystal Ball debated Adam Smith, every 2 seconds, let's take a pause here.
Yeah.
Because she disagreed with virtually every point he made. And she did it very effectively, I thought, extremely effectively. But at some point, it just doesn't work. Then it's like, why did you come on the show? If you're going to disagree with every single word this person says, then why did you even come on?
That's not, I wasn't even saying like you should go up there and disagree.
I was careful to, so to speak, pick my battles.
You did pick your battles when it came to defending the Bolsheviks.
I think that politically, she's pretty much innocuous. She's not seen as a political figure or aspiring to political office. She's kind of a figure, you might say, like Oprah. Oprah appealed to white women, as does apparently Candace Owens, obviously coming from different directions. But I would say politically pretty innocuous. I don't believe that with the case of Tucker Carlson. I think there's a potential political problem.
Yeah, so he's essentially saying here that Candace Owens isn't a political threat. She doesn't have political ambitions, and because of that, he doesn't view her as somebody who is dangerous in the same way that Tucker Carlson is. Now, honestly, I think he's making a little bit of an arbitrary distinction here, because I think you could apply the same logic either way. I don't think there's any definitive reason to say that Candace Owens doesn't have political ambitions. She's been a political commentator her entire career. She's never been anything else. And Tucker Carlson, conversely, you could say, oh, well, he doesn't seem like he has ambitions to run for office. He's just an honest guy who just appeals to this demographic or that demographic. So I think it's not entirely consistent. It seems based more on this premise that Candace Owens was open to having him on and open to having that type of conversation. So he didn't say here, would I talk to Tucker Carlson? Have I refused to talk to Tucker Carlson? Or maybe the other way around. He criticizes Glenn Greenwald here for praising Tucker Carlson as a friend of his, and I'm glad that Glenn Greenwald caught that shot. He deserves it, frankly. I've never trusted his intentions, really, and that's a perfect example of why. The lack of clarity on the fact that what Tucker is doing is clearly a political project. But it raises the question for me, if Tucker Carlson was willing to, put out the message of Norm Finkelstein to his audience, would that change the way Norm Finkelstein looks at Tucker Carlson? Because again, I don't think the idea that Candace Owens doesn't represent a political threat, I don't think that really holds water, especially when you consider the amount of people that she does reach with her audience. The fact that her criticism of Israel and Gaza is mixed in with like a lot of anti-Semitism is, I think, extremely problematic. And at very least, you could say it affects the way the right views this issue and primes them to eventually vote for a Tucker Carlson type coalition. That would be the argument for why Candace Owens is just as threatening in a way as somebody like Tucker Carlson, because we don't know who is going to end up running. We don't know who's going to try to capture that energy, but they're all kind of building the same project. I don't think there's really an exception there for Candace Owens. In some ways, I think she's worse. But that leads me to this last part where he mentions this criticism of the idea of anti-Semitism, a common thing that we hear, that criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic, and the distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and how that's weaponized. So he has a very interesting take here, which again, I find a little bit inconsistent with what he's saying about Candace Owens, or maybe it's a little too consistent. So I'll use that to wrap this up, because I do also want to get into the meat of this issue, which is the genocide in Gaza and Israel's ongoing actions in Gaza and in America to, propagandize. And that really is the core of the conversation that they had here. So I want to bring it out on that. So here is Norm Finkelstein talking about the sort of contradictions of accusations of anti-Semitism.
See, the problem in my view is any definition you come across of anti-Semitism, if you were to open up a Webster's, if you were to open up an Oxford English Dictionary and OED definition, they always insert the word irrational. an irrational hatred of Jews, an irrational belief that Jews are this, the Jews are that. Here's the problem. What if a lot of the resentment is rational? What if a state calling itself the state of the Jewish people, what if your resentment at the genocide it's perpetrating, what if it's rational? What if Jews are carrying on in a flagrant, brazen fashion to suppress our right to freedom of speech and using their considerable financial power to do so? If you resent Jews for that, is it anti-Semitism? But it's rational.
The way that I talk about these issues always is revolved around the notion that if organized Jewry was this monolithic force, in the way that many Jewish Zionist Americans in key positions of power try to present it as, utilizing the vague interpretation of Zionism, or even saying Israel's a Jewish state, Israel has to remain a Jewish state, Israel has demographic concerns. Why should we care about that? We don't care about that with any other country. As a matter of fact, when Nick Fuentes says we have demographic concerns, or when Tucker Carlson says we have demographic concerns here in America, we understand that as white supremacy. We understand that as white nationalism, and we find it abhorrent.
Totally agree.
So why is there this distinction? The way I approach this issue is, if there was this monolithic understanding, there would not be such a gigantic generational divide, and there wouldn't be billions of dollars invested in ensuring that young American Jews, young Jews in Europe, are indoctrinated into this false understanding, this false notion
listen,
that, you know.
Hasan, Mr. Piker.
Okay, so I know some of you might find that to be a bit much. I mostly agree with him. The issue that I would take about this is that if you're saying anti-Semitism is based on the irrational hatred of Jews or the irrational fear of Jews or whatever, and that it's not that irrational to come to that conclusion based on the amount of power and destruction that Israel specifically has wielded over people's lives, I think it's one thing to say that, you know, that person whose life has been destroyed by the state of Israel, them coming to anti-Semitic conclusions is not something that it makes any sense to sit there and argue with. I agree with that. I don't think that's the right thing for people to be doing, and that isn't really where the serious threat to, you know, the values of the world that we want to live in lie. But I think, though, if he's splitting this hair about irrationality, whether it's irrational to come to anti-Semitic conclusions, whether that is anti-Semitism, I think that he's making a distinction here that like serves no purpose to be made. And if anything, he is a little bit opening the door for some of the open anti-Semitism that people like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens do traffic in. And given the fact that he has some overlap with Candace Owens because he's talked to her, I don't know that that's entirely the most responsible thing to do. Now, overall, he makes a very responsible case for this, and I want to be clear too that because I cut this down, he is making a pretty robust case here about how Holocaust survivors have these same type of prejudices or generalizations against all Germans in his experience, people in his family. So are you going to sit there and argue with that person just because that's not right to think about it that way? No, that doesn't make any sense, and I agree. However, the problem though is if you say the Jews killed my entire family with bombs, that's accurate. It's not irrational to say that. But the irrationality comes with the broader global conspiracy, which then adds on layers to what must be done in order to overthrow the oppression that you face in your life. And I will add to this that I don't think it's a given. I think we kind of take it as a given, but I don't necessarily think it's a given that Gazans or Palestinians do translate the hatred that they have towards Zionism or towards the state of Israel to a hatred of all Jews. Certainly some of them do, some of them are going to, but I even saw recently Channel 5 did a segment where he went to the West Bank and there were like, you know, children on scooters who were articulating the difference between hating Zionism and hating Jews. And while, you know, you could say, oh, they were just coached to say that, or they only said that was because cameras were there, even still, I mean, that's them saying the right thing. That shows that that discourse is, you know, being disseminated amongst them, and that people understand that at very least turning it into a hatred of Jews is not something that helps their cause in Western media. And we don't have to create too many excuses for open conclusions of anti-Semitism, especially if it comes to this place where when you're talking about Candace Owens and she is taking these tragedies that happen in Gaza and extrapolating it into the larger conspiracies about killing JFK or whatever crazy shit, is that irrational by Norm Finkelstein's own definition? I think it is. I think that's the entire premise of anti-Semitism. I do think it's important to reinforce the right things and not indulge people's temptation to turn it into a broader Jewish conspiracy, if for no other reason, and there are many good reasons for it, but if for no other reason than to not water down the cause of stopping the genocide in Gaza and demilitarizing the Zionist project.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic, can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.